What's up, everybody? Chris Pinnell here. We're going with my wide receiver tier rankings for week 9 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Let's dive right into it. And we have 4 wide receivers that are going to make the cut in the S tier. No Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. He is a potential S tier kind of guy week in, week out. So we'll say sayonara to him until week 10. We're going to kick it off with the obvious option. It's Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. You're starting him no matter what. Bit of a tougher matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs. They're ranking 6 versus wide receivers, but on the season, 0.9 fantasy points per out ran, 4.26 yards per out ran, which the next best guy on here is A.J. Brown at 3.13. And we know how good A.J. Brown has been this year. That's just how good Tyreek Hill has been. A touchdown per game, 130 yards. His pace this season, well over 2,000 yards. He is absolutely crushing it. But A.J. Brown, right there with him. He does not make number 4 because of the matchup, but he will make the S tier. Ja'Marr Chase comes in at number 2 for me. And the Bengals looks like they're bouncing back a little bit on offense. Had a great week versus the 49ers last weekend, and Ja'Marr Chase gets a ton of volume. He's one of the most talented wide receivers in all the NFL. And if Joe Burrow is going to start playing a little bit better, well, Ja'Marr Chase deserves to be in this S tier. The Bills are currently ranked 13th versus wide receivers, but injuries have made them a little bit worse in recent weeks. He's seen nearly 12 targets per game, over 8 catches, 33.5% target share. Yeah, fire up Ja'Marr Chase, obviously, if you have him. Stephon Diggs, also a consistent S tier member with the consistency and talent level that he has. A bit of a tougher matchup versus Cincy, but I'm really looking forward to this game. 48.5 point over under, one of the best games of the week, only behind the Miami Dolphins and Kansas City Chiefs, which has a 50.5 total over in Germany. Bengals are allowing the 9th fewest points per game to the wide receiver position, but when you have a 33% target share, getting 11 targets per game from Josh Allen, yeah, you're going to be a bona fide stud week in, week out, especially with how good Stephon Diggs is. And then rounding out our S tier here, we have to have A.J. Brown. He has been incredible so far this season. We are also now at 6 games in a row of 120 plus yards, which is incredible in its own right. Over 10 targets per game, 31.5% target share, and 115 yards per game. He's always going to be a touchdown threat because he's a big body and he can overpower defenders. Really tough matchup versus the Cowboys. They're allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to the position, but I'm always going to give the edge to an elite level wide receiver over a good defense. Then we have Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers, one of the most consistent players at the position week in, week out. Now, it's a pretty tough matchup versus the Jets defense. They're allowing the fewest points per game to the position. And it's funny, we just went from the absolute best matchup to the absolute worst matchup. But with Keenan Allen, use him all over the field. He's in the slot 63% of the time, on the right 20%, and on the left 16%. So I'm sure they're going to find ways to get him open. He's seeing double-digit targets per game, 28.6% target share. He's in a good offense, one of the best quarterbacks in football. So no reason at all you shouldn't like Keenan Allen despite the really poor matchup. And then Cooper Kupp. I am not sure what's going to happen at the quarterback position this week for the Los Angeles Rams. Matthew Stafford is injured, and it sounds like he could end up missing this game. And I believe Brett Rypien, that's how you pronounce his name, would slot in at quarterback. Obviously, that hurts his downside because we know Stafford loves Cooper Kupp. And if Stafford was in, I mean, Cooper Kupp's a usual S-tier contender every single week. But if it's not Matthew Stafford, honestly, he could headline the B group this week. But still, since I don't know at this moment, Cooper Kupp still belongs in the A tier. Bit of a tougher matchup versus the Packers on the road. They tend to be a lot worse versus the run than they are versus the pass, but it's still Cooper Kupp. No matter who the quarterback is, they should be looking his way no matter what. And now our B tier wide receivers, and these guys do have A tier upside, but not as consistent week in, week out. Although this guy is the model of consistency, and that's why he's going to headline the B tier group. Adam Thielen. And while he's not an exciting offense, he's averaging 10 targets per game on a near 30% target share. The A dot is low, but that's fine in a PPR league because, I mean, those points add up in a hurry when you're just racking up catches every single week. Over 8 receptions and 83 receiving yards. Great matchup versus the Colts. They currently rank 20th versus wide receivers. You're firing up Adam Thielen as honestly, a wide receiver 1. I mean, at this point of the year, we've seen enough out of Adam Thielen to know his role in this offense, and the Panthers didn't make any trades for another option in this offense, so we know where the ball's going, and it's going to Adam Thielen, and it's going to happen often. Davante Adams hates life over in Las Vegas, but unfortunately, he is there to stay. They did change quarterbacks, though. Aiden O'Connell, AOC, is going to be the starting quarterback here, and while I'm not sure if that's going to change much for Davante Adams, it at least might get his spirits back up because Jimmy Garoppolo, I realized he was under a ton of pressure in that game. He was getting happy feet, and it was just really throwing him off. But he missed him on like a wide open 60-yard touchdown here at the end of the game. The 98-yard touchdown was not as bad. I mean, I know it's easy to be an armchair quarterback and say, the dude was wide open, just deliver it. But when you're in the end zone and the fans are screaming right at you and you got a guy coming right at you and you've been under that much pressure all night, like I get it, missing. Still was bad, but I mean, we'll give him a little bit of slack there. But either way, AOC is going to come in. Hopefully they just tell him to feed Davante Adams the ball because he nuked his helmet on the sideline after that last miss. and he is definitely not a happy camper right now. So hopefully they can get him the ball somehow, because he is way too talented to be wasted on that offense. Getting, 11 yards last week? Is that what it was? One catch for 11 yards. Pathetic. No, I don't think he had any catches. Any Vegas receiver in general had any catch in the first half, which should not happen because him and Jakobi Meyers are very talented guys. Chris Olave comes in next, and he's also dealing with some quarterback issues. Derek Carr, well, we've seen guys like Shaheed have success. We've seen Michael Thomas have success. For whatever reason, him and Chris Olave don't have the best chemistry. We know Olave is an extremely talented wide receiver from Ohio State. 9.5 targets per game, 27% target share. And he is an air yards darling. 15.4 ADOT, 1,079 air yards in the season, which is only behind A.J. Brown at 1,080. Even better than Tyreek Hill. Obviously, though, I mean, I would much rather have Tyreek Hill than Chris Olave. Air yards are not the end-all be-all, as evident as the production we've seen from Chris Olave this season. But the volume is going to be there, and this is a really good matchup versus Chicago Bears, who are currently ranking 18th versus receivers. And I like the Saints' offense in general this week, so Olave will make the B tier, even though the chemistry with Derek Carr just really isn't there. But at some point, we're going to get an explosion game for Chris Olave, and I don't want to sit him just because he's not like a guy you'd ever sit anyway. But Garrett Wilson, another one that is having quarterback troubles, because when we drafted him in the either late first round or early second round, you expected him to have Aaron Rodgers all season long. Unfortunately, that was not the case, as he tore his Achilles in the first series of week 1. And while he's still getting the volume, it's obviously not the best volume from Zach Wilson. We're still seeing 70 yards per game on 5.5 catches, close to 10 targets per game on a 32.5% target share, a 48% market share of the team's air yards. But this is a great matchup versus the Chargers, who are allowing the third most points per game to the wide receiver position. I know Zach Wilson, not very good, but the ball's got to go somewhere, and Garrett Wilson is their top tier option. And then we have Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. If Matthew Stafford was playing, he's probably either at the top of the end of the B tier or in the low end of the A tier. As of right now, I am not sure, but we know the ball goes two places in this offense, and it's Cooper Kupp and it's Puka Nacua, and now a little bit of Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman, as ugly as that sounds. But through the air, it's those two options, and we know Puka, he's good, he's talented, he's got a role in this offense, so he'll still be used. Now our C tier guys that are still very solid, wide receiver 2s or high-end flexes, depending if you're in a shallow league or you just loaded up a wide receiver this season. But Jalen Waddle comes in, leading off our C tier here. This game should be just really high scoring in general, not the best matchup in the world, but the Miami Dolphins offense is way too good for anybody to be sat that has a prominent role. So Raheem Mostert, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, obviously, and of course, Tua, the one that's getting them all the football. But highest over of the week, 24-point implied team total. Still seeing 7.5 targets per game on a 23.5% target share. Super talented receiver, just haven't really... I feel like we've expected more out of Jalen Waddle this year, but he's still been fine. But definitely still a very solid wide receiver 2 week in, week out. Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts also makes the C tier here. He just gets too much volume to ignore him, plus a good matchup versus Carolina defense. Although versus receivers specifically, they are ranking 7th versus the position this season, but still overall it's not a good defense, and not one that I'm certainly concerned about. 27.5% target share, over 9 targets per game. Hard to pass that up week in, week out. T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. It has been a horrendous season, and he was my 3rd pick in fantasy football this year. I went Cooper Kupp in round 1. I know the injury was not fun to me, and now with Matthew Stafford looking a little banged up, I'm very concerned about that. Then I took Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, I think we're all happy about that. But then I took T. Higgins. And yeah, I am not happy with the output that I've had from T. Higgins so far this season. We're getting 6.6 targets per game, a sub 20% target share, only 3 catches and 36 receiving yards. It has been awful. At some point, he's going to bounce back. Good spot versus Buffalo. High implied team total. High scoring game potentially. So I'm still in on T. Higgins. I think he's a start this week if you have him. Probably more so as a wide receiver 3. That's wide receiver 2 in your lineups. But honestly, I think he has wide receiver 2 upside this week because I do have him ranked within the top 20, which might feel high, but I'm trending a little bit higher on these Bengals this week. And as you can see, I have Jamar Chase, number 2 overall. Then I have Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. And really disappointing week last week versus Arizona Cardinals. It was a great matchup. I had him as one of my starts of the week. He ends up with less than 20 receiving yards on multiple catches too. It was just a really weird week for the passing offense. For the Baltimore Ravens, I mean, Gus Edwards pretty much took care of business, and Lamar Jackson didn't even do anything either on the ground, less than 20 rushing yards. So we'll just throw that one away. But another really good matchup here for the Baltimore Ravens as they face the Seattle Seahawks, who have been awful versus the pass this year. They ranked 25th versus wide receivers. And he's still supporting a near 28% target share in the season, over 7 targets per game, 58 receiving yards, and 5.5 catches. So even though it was disappointing last week, I'm still in on Zay Flowers. Devontae Smith finally had a bit of a breakout game last week, over 100 yards, got into the end zone, was very excited with the output that we got. He would be higher in my rankings if it wasn't such a tough matchup as Dallas's second versus wide receivers, but it was really nice to see him have that, I don't want to call it a breakout game because we've seen games from him where he's done this before, but from what we saw this year, I would call it probably a mini breakout game. Then we have the duo of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Both guys pretty much see similar production every single week. Well, similar opportunity, I should say. The production not always the same because Mike Evans is more of a big play touchdown threat. Chris Godwin more of that safety valve. But both guys seeing right around 7.5 targets per game, both right around 24% target share. The only thing is that Mike Evans has the higher ADOT at 14.2 compared to Chris Godwin at 10.4. And he sees more touchdown upside as he is at 0.71 in the season. And Chris Godwin has 1 touchdown on the air. But he did get that last week on a nice slant. And he could have caught the Hail Mary, but he just wasn't really looking, and I don't understand why. Then we have Nico Collins of the Houston Texans to round out this C tier here. And he's just been very solid this year. 82 receiving yards per game, 6.5 targets, 22% target share. Although in recent weeks, he's definitely been kind of trending downwards because honestly, I feel like just a few weeks ago, we would have been putting him at the probably lower end of the B tier, to be honest, or the higher end of the C tier. So he's been kind of trending in the wrong direction for me, but it's a good matchup versus Tampa Bay. They are 24th versus wide receivers. So this is definitely a really good week to get back on track. Moving on to our D tier, Amari Cooper is going to headline here. Now, the issue is I don't know what's going to happen at the quarterback position, like I've mentioned a few times. If it's Deshaun Watson, Cooper versus Arizona probably belongs in that C tier this week. But if it's PJ Walker, maybe even DTR, I don't think we've committed to a quarterback yet this week. He's somewhere in between that D and F tier, unfortunately, even though he's super talented and one of the better receivers in football. But I mean, the quarterback play has been horrendous for him this season, but we know the upside with him. So that's why we're going to put him in the D tier as for right now because it's a great matchup. DK Metcalf also makes the cut in here, although I don't really love Seattle Seahawks offense this week. I mean, I know DK Metcalf has a ton of upside, 23.5% target share, 41% market share of the team's air yards, 14 ADOT, and we know he's super talented, but a bit of a tougher matchup versus Baltimore. They're 8th versus fantasy wide receivers this season, but talent alone is going to put him in the D tier, but I really don't trust him a ton, but he's been somewhat consistent on the season. DeAndre Hopkins might have new life with Will Levis. 3 touchdowns. We've seen some long balls, and Ryan Tannehill was not going to offer that. So I think Levis maybe just puts DeAndre Hopkins into a new dimension. By new dimension, I mean from being an F tier wide receiver to a D tier. So shout out to Levis for that. But a pretty solid matchup versus Pittsburgh. They're currently ranking 28th versus receivers, meaning they're allowing the 5th most points per game to the position. So with Hopkins ADOT currently at 16, 40% market share of the team's air yards, and a 26.5% target share. Will Levis can play somewhat like he did last weekend, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Hopkins has to rise up our boards a bit. Deontay Johnson, he returned, and he had a typical Deontay Johnson performance where he was heavily targeted. 14 targets in that one, had like right around 85 yards. Had a really bad drop as well early in the game. I think it was like a post down the middle or it was a seam route. I only saw the ending of the play, but right through his hands. Could have had a better game. But still, if he's going to be that heavily targeted, it's a pretty good matchup versus the Titans. Tough run defense, but they're 26th versus receivers. I mean, Johnson has to be started at least as a flex play. Tyler Lockett, similar upside to DK Metcalf. Honestly, there's really not much else to say. He gets similar volume, 23% target share, which is right on par with Metcalf. ADOT's not too far behind, although it's a little bit lower. 7 targets per game, 5 catches. Like, just a boring play. I don't really like Geno much this week, but you always have to have interest in some of the Seattle receivers because we know the ball goes in this offense. It's basically 2 guys with Lockett and Metcalf, and then whoever's going to be at the running back position. DJ Moore has been a stud this year, but quarterback play obviously not too impressive for him. He's going to have T-Bag once again dropping back for him. Wasn't a great game versus the Los Angeles Chargers last week, but still a guy that's getting 7 targets per game on a 27% target share and a 40% market share of the team's air yards. And then rounding out our DT here, we have Terry McLaurin, who had a good week last week versus the Philadelphia Eagles, although that's one of the best matchups you can ask for. Bit of a tougher spot here versus the Patriots, but they're still bottom half in the league versus the wide receiver position. Barely bottom half, but still counts. They're allowing 37 points per game. The position, Sam Howell has been playing some pretty good football. 24.5% target share, nearly 8 targets per game. That makes him fantasy viable. And finally, we've made it to the F tier here, going over our top 36 wide receivers. And Jordan Addison is going to lead us off for us. Now, if Kirk Cousins was back, he is not an F tier receiver, but we have Jaren Hall dropping back at quarterback for us. And honestly, not really too sure what to expect. What I do know is it's going to hurt the passing game a bit. Still no Justin Jefferson, so he's going to be the wide receiver 1 here, but everybody takes a bit of a hit with no Kirk Cousins pass, and we'll headline the F tier for him. We'll still give him that kind of respect. Michael Thomas comes in next for the New Orleans Saints. Good matchup versus Chicago Bears, like we talked about. with Chris Olave. And honestly, I'm not really sure they should be this far apart in my tier rankings, but that's just how my projections have him played out, so it is what it is. But he's been consistently getting about 7 targets per game so far this season, 7.5 on the season, 22% target share. It's a good matchup. They have a decent implied team total this week. I mean, I think Thomas is a solid flex play if you're in a deeper league. Then we have Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts, and he too is just another guy that's been getting consistent targets so far this season. Just under 7 on the season, over a 20% target share. Lower 8 out of 8.7, but 5 catches, 60 yards on the season. And like I said, the Carolina defense doesn't scare me too much, even though they've been kind of stingy versus opposing wide receivers this season. They've just been so bad versus the run, it kind of trickles down to everything else. Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders still makes the list here because he's heavily involved in this offense. Last week, we'll kind of call it a throwaway. Still a 25% target share on the season, just under 8 targets per game. Hopefully AOC can get them the football. He's definitely the wide receiver 2 behind Davante Adams, but honestly, his target distribution has not been terribly too far off so far this year. George Pickens, still in the fold, caught 1 ball last week, but it was in the end zone. Still had 5 targets in that game. And even though Deontay Johnson is the number 1 wide receiver, Pickens is still too talented to be like a complete overthrow in this offense. So he's still going to be here for me. Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills, we saw him finally have a pretty solid game last week in primetime. And while he's not a consistent player by any means, he does have touchdown upside and he has big play upside. And the matchup versus Cincy, not that great, but this should be a pretty high scoring game. Joshua Palmer is the wide receiver 2 in this offense. They get hurt in that last game, ended up coming back in, but it allowed Quentin Johnston to actually make a bit of an impact for like the first time so far this season. So maybe that leads to less snaps for Palmer, more snaps for Quentin Johnston, but Palmer's been fine in his own right. It's not like he wasn't just coming off a game where he had over 100 receiving yards. So still assuming he's the wide receiver 2 in this offense, that's a very good role to have in the Chargers, and tough matchup versus the Jets, but I mean, that's why he's in the F tier. It's not like I have much higher. And then Marquise Brown just getting consistent targets every single week. Now, quarterback situation in Arizona looks like it's going to be Tooney at the quarterback position, so not 100% sure what to expect. We have a 15-point implied team total. This is a brutal matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to the position. But he still has a 27% target share in the season, 40% market share of the team's air yards, and over 8 targets. So just based off the volume alone, he's got to be somewhere in the rankings. And then we have Mr. Irrelevant, Drake London, rounding out our top 36. And they're making a quarterback switch over in Atlanta. It's going to be Taylor Heineke under center. So is that an upgrade? Probably, I guess, over Desmond Ridder. He's pretty bad. We've seen Heineke a few times. It's not like he's a super polished passer or anything, but wasn't that a playoff game or something where Taylor Heineke had some magic right there? Or was it to get in the playoffs? I forget. It was a couple years ago, but it was a fun watch. But Drake London sees volume in this offense at least. I mean, we're seeing about 7-ish targets per game, which is a decent role. We know he's talented. He did pop up on the injury report, though, so monitor that. But yeah, he's number 36 for me. With that being said, that's all I got for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you like down below. Subscribe to the channel on your way out. Wish you all the best of luck this week. See you all next time.